Everybody has a story, and every story needs to be heard. On this podcast, we are talking with each member of the General Conference Leadership Council. I'm your host, Alyssa Truman, and this is ANN Profiles. Today we have with us Frank Hasel. He currently is serving as the Associate Director of the Biblical Research Institute. Hello, Frank.
Hi.
Hi. I have been looking forward to this for a very long time. We have talked, we're in Sabbath school together.
That's
You've come
right.
over to my house and we've had a backyard bonfire,
Yes.
but I don't actually know much about who you are. So I'm very excited about this conversation we get to have together
Yes.
over our nice cups of water.
Yes, sure.
So, Frank, this is your life story, how God has led you. And I like to always start at the very beginning. A very good place to start, I've been told. So tell us a little about where were you born? And tell us a little bit about your family and your history, because I know a little bit about your grandfather, I believe, but give us a little bit of your family history.
Sure. So let's start at the beginning, all right? At least somewhat at the beginning. I was born and raised in Germany. I grew up in Germany, and that's why German is my mother tongue. And I grew up in an Adventist home. My father and my mother, they were fine Christian people. They were Adventist members. My father was a pastor, evangelist for many years in Germany. And that's kind of where I grew up. What many people, or some people might know, especially in the Adventist context, is the book A Thousand Shall Fall. That is really a fascinating story, and a true story for that matter, of how God helped my family, that is my father and especially my grandfather and my grandmother, during very difficult times in Nazi Germany during World War II, and how God provided for them and how God helped in supernatural ways. But that's the story of my parents, basically, and my grandparents. That's not my story.
It's not your story,
but it is part of my life, because I grew up as a boy listening to those stories, and my grandmother would tell them. I still remember sitting at her bed at the end of her life. She got rather sick and was bedridden, could not leave the bed. But she had a beautiful voice. When she was young, she got an offer to be an opera singer. She got a stipend to become a famous opera singer, and she declined because she felt that would be a conflict with keeping the Sabbath. And so she didn't pursue the career of an opera singer, but she still had a beautiful voice and could sing beautifully and tell stories. And I would listen to those stories that are recorded in the book A Thousand Shall Fall and many others. And I still remember once she finished a story, I would say, "Grandma, tell it again." You know, you can listen to some of these stories over and over at time.
I want to encourage people who are listening or watching this. A Thousand Shall Fall was probably one of the most pivotal stories that I have read in really kind of like more modern times. I guess although World War II is not probably modern anymore, but it feels modern, like modern mission story, you know, on God's faithfulness to his people.
Yes,
It was so inspiring to me. So I remember the first time I met you, I was kind of in awe. It's like Frank Hasel. So you were brought up in a family that their faith was everything to them. I mean, it was a very, very important part of who they were. So how did that shape your formative early years?
Oh, very much so. Not in the sense that they were constantly talking about that, but I had the joy and the privilege and the benefit of having had parents who had a very pleasant character and disposition. And my mother would just be a wonderful Christian woman. And her motto was, let the children be children as long as they can. They will grow up and be adults soon enough in life. And once you remember your childhood and have pleasant memories of your childhood, this will stay with you for the rest of your life. And she was right. And so I really appreciate that emphasis and that perspective on things. But I tell you, just because my parents and my grandparents experienced extraordinary, fantastic things with God doesn't mean that you automatically have the same experiences
No, it
yourself.
doesn't.
And so actually my life is rather unspectacular, if you want to say that. There is nothing extraordinary about it. But looking back on it, I can see that God is leading and was leading. You know, sometimes when you're in the heat of it, or when you are in the daily nitty-gritty of things, you don't see that much of God's leading. But then looking back, you perceive, oh, yes, his hand was clearly in my life. It was visible there, and he guided and he led in marvelous ways. So let me share one little detail that many people don't know, and you
I'm
probably
excited.
you're not either. You know, the fact that we can have this conversation is actually a miracle. Because when I was a young boy, I was quite sick very often. And one of the problems that I had was that I had ear infections. And ear infections can be very painful. And I had them often. And so after a while, you know, my mother decided to go to the doctor to have a closer look. And they found out that I had tonsils that were quite large and infected. And the doctor said, well, we'll have to remove them in order to get rid of this infection in his throat. And so we arranged for a appointment in the hospital for surgery. And that's just a little tiny surgery. It's nothing spectacular. It's something that is a routine thing that is done thousands and thousands of times. And so they had the surgery, and I was at that time maybe 8, 9, 10 years old, around that age. And when I came out of the surgery, I could not speak anymore. I mean, I spoke, but nobody understood what I said. It was such a strong nasal tone because the tonsil that was removed did not close up anymore. And so when I was drinking something, the water would come out of my nose. If I was eating soup, the soup would come out of my nose.
Oh my.
And I was speaking, and I knew what I was saying, but nobody understood what I was saying. And that was quite a shock to my parents, and especially my father. And so I had to take speech therapy, and actually had to learn to speak again and to pronounce words properly and understandably. And if I look back to that, I see, you know, God's leading in my life, because what would I do without my voice? What would I do without being able to communicate the way God has intended me to speak to others and to share some of the insights? So that's
Wow.
a little detail that many people are not aware of.
So you had speech therapy to help you learn how to speak. How did that, how did that solve the drinking problem?
Well, after a while, you know, the things closed, and ever since I don't have a problem. I
Okay.
can drink,
I
and
was
I can
curious. I
have
was like, if you want, you could drink some
no.
water and demonstrate.
No. It's over. But and I'm glad that I don't have a problem with that. But in the moment, for several weeks, I still
Scary.
remember sitting in class, and the teacher would ask a question. And I raised my hand, and I answered, and she didn't understand. Nobody in class understood. It's embarrassing. It's very embarrassing. And they handled it gracefully, I'm glad to say, and they were patient. And of course, I had speech therapy and other things, you know, so that kind of helped to rectify the whole thing and adjust.
Wow. Yeah. That was That was something I was not
See?
expecting. Frank Hasel without a voice, the church would have missed out on a lot. Although you're a brilliant writer, so it might have worked out, but probably not. So in your early childhood years, you went to school. Was it an Adventist school? Was it a public school? What is it like being a young Adventist in Germany?
Well, it's perhaps quite different from what other Adventists are used to, especially in the United States and other parts of the world. In Germany, we did not have Adventist education, except for one school that was like academy level. But except for that, no elementary school, no church school, no nothing at the time when I was a child. So I had to go to public school. In fact, I was the only Seventh-day Adventist student in my little village. And if you are a Seventh-day Adventist and you're the only one, you kind of have to stand up for your faith. And that's what I had to do. I had to go to school, and I talked to the principal, to the director of the school, and I told him that I'm a Seventh-day Adventist and I will not attend school on Sabbath. And he asked why. And I said, for religious reasons. And Germany grants religious freedom to those who, for conscientious reasons, want to follow their conscience. And he was gracious enough to accept that, and he knew the laws, and he granted that. But not every teacher that I had was as excited and as positive as that. And I still remember I have had teachers who would not believe that I would not come to school on Sabbath. And they said, well, if you're not coming on Sabbath, for one thing, you have to learn everything we discussed in school on Sabbath. And on Monday, they were sure to quiz me on that one. So I didn't have a weekend off. On Sundays, I would have to go to my friends and find out what they discussed and cover it on Sabbath in school. And then I had to learn on Sunday in order to be prepared on Monday morning to give an answer to those specifics that they had learned on Sabbath. And one particular teacher didn't like that at all. And he deliberately placed an exam on Sabbath. And he said, well, we'll have the exam on Sabbath. You'd better be there. And I said, well, I'm not coming, excuse me. But when he saw that I was serious, then I had to write the exam alone, which is not a pleasant experience. But he knew that I was serious, and he never had an exam on Sabbath with me after that. And so God provided, and helped me to be convinced at an early age of what we Adventists believe and what we stand for, and so forth. And that changed then, Alicia, a little later when I attended an Adventist school, amazingly, and my faith was quite shaken there, which is another interesting story.
I want to come to that, but before we do, you commented on something, and I just kind of want to understand this a little bit. So you're the only Adventist young person in your village. Does that mean you were also the only Adventist young person in your church?
Not quite, but we had a small church. The church building and the location of the church was rather not attractive. It was an old church, and we had many members in our church came from the former Yugoslavia, and they had young people there. But I was the only German in my age. So on Sabbath, we lived way out in the countryside, a tiny little village. If we wanted to go to church, we had to walk because we didn't have a car. My father was an evangelist. He was out doing evangelist 3 months a year in a row, and so we were basically alone. So we had to walk from our house to the train station, like 35 minutes. And then we had to take the train another 40 minutes. And then we arrived in the city where the church was, and there we had to take another 25-minute walk until we arrived at the church. So that was quite a major traveling experience. And everyone in the village, if you live in a little village, people know each other, and it's not like anonymous like in a big city setting. So, we would dress up in our Sabbath clothes and walk 35, 40 minutes to the train station. And I was sure that all the neighbors watched as we were walking, and they could see whether we were serious getting to church or not. And so that's what we did week after week. But I was the only German-speaking young person in the church. I would spend some Sabbath with my friends from Yugoslavia and enjoyed the wonderful food that they prepared. But of course, I did not understand their language, and I didn't speak their language. And so I started to go to the youth group. There was a youth group at that church, and we had a wonderful youth pastor who became very influential in my life. And they graciously accepted me. But there was a time gap between my age and the youngest in the youth group that kind of was a generation gap. And they still would tolerate me and welcome me in their circle. And that helped me to engage with questions that they had that otherwise I would not be able to interact with on my own. And that helped me grow a lot in my faith experience as well.
So you went through public schools. Was it all the way through like what we
10th
would call
grade.
like high school years or
Mhm,
whatever here?
mhm,
Okay.
mhm.
So then, and this actually during these years, you actually were kind of solidifying your faith because you were having
Yes,
to stand
yes,
up
yes,
for it and you're
yes.
having to do that.
Yeah.
Um, so after 10th grade, where do you go?
Well, actually, I wanted to become a physical therapist. That was my dream profession. And so after 10th grade, I applied for several places, and there was a long waiting list. And the earliest spot I could get was 3 years later.
Oh, wow.
So imagine, you want to get an education, you apply, and they say nothing available. Check out again, 3 years from now. So I was thinking, what should I do for the next 3 years? And and somebody told me, well, if you have an opportunity, try to accomplish the best you can. And that was to finish academy, which was 13 years in Germany. It's not just 12 years, it's 13 years. And with that academy graduation, you're entitled and you're permitted in Germany to enter university. With 10th grade, you're only able to get a professional career in some practical disciplines, but you cannot go to university. So I said, okay, well, we'll go with the Abitur, as they call it, and then I can still do my physical therapy, or I'm free to do something else. And in the meantime, I worked in the hospital and earned some money and had a chance to see the work of a physical therapist, and I really enjoyed that and liked it. But it became clear to me that if I would do that for the rest of my life, it would not be that satisfying for me. And so that started a process of rethinking of what I should do. Yes.
You decide you're not going to be a physical therapist.
Yes, yes.
Where did you start thinking that maybe you wanted to go instead of physical therapy?
Instead.
Yeah.
Well, after I finished with academy, after grade 13, then I had to make up my mind, of course, because then I had to decide which career I wanted to pursue. And at that time, I just had many different options in my mind. And I was interested in all kinds of different things, from studying biology to being an auto mechanic, to studying medicine, to being a teacher, to being a pastor. I think I had like 12 different options that I was interested and I'd liked, and I just could not decide. And I still remember my father gave me some good counsel, but your parents give you some things to think about, and you don't think it's that important and that valuable. But he said,
Because they're old and they're not us, and
yes, and
they
you
don't
have
know
you
these
have to
things.
find your own way, and you have to yes,
I've never heard
mature.
those with my children ever.
So he said, take a sheet of paper for each option that you uh, have 3 columns. One is plus, the advantages, one is minus, disadvantages, and one column is undecided, where you don't know. And just write it down, write down all the advantages that you see, all the disadvantages. And I said, oh, Dad, I don't need to do that. I have it up here. I know what he said, believe me, writing down has the ability to clarify thoughts that otherwise swirl around in your head, and it helps to get a clearer picture of what you want to do. And it's okay. I'll took the time. I'll took a sheet of paper for every option. So let's say for medicine, I wrote down advantage is I can help other people. Advantage is I will earn a lot of money. Advantages, and I wrote down all the advantages, and then I wrote down all the disadvantages. And he said, pray about it and be honest with yourself, and write down everything as it comes to your mind. And so I wrote down disadvantages. It's a long and very difficult study. It's If you want to do it, it probably will not have much time for family later on if you work as a medical doctor. And so I wrote down all the disadvantages that I saw. And then at that time, if you wanted to study medicine in Germany, you needed to have a certain grade point average. And that was still something to be decided. And so I didn't know whether I would reach that grade point average in order to get a place for a place at the university. And then once you write it down, then you have to evaluate the plus and the minus, the advantages and the disadvantages. And you have to evaluate those not just on the number of advantages and disadvantages. So you cannot just say, okay, there are 10 advantages and 12 disadvantages, therefore it's out.
What's next?
Or vice versa. You have to evaluate the pros and the cons on the basis of your priorities and the things that are really important in your life. And that, of course, meant that I had to think what is really important in my life. What are my priorities? What are things that I cannot live without? And what are things that I really need? And so you look at the different things, and then you evaluate the evidence.
So where did the evidence lead?
And the evidence was amazing. So out of the 12 different options that I had initially, I think everything was eliminated except for 2. And the 2 I could not decide. And it became very clear, as much as I like certain things, if I look at the evidence and the pros and the cons, this is not really an option for me. And so the 2 options were still up in the air, and I needed to decide. And the school year ended, and I had to decide where to continue. And so what do you do in a situation like that as a Christian? So I decided I'll pray about it. I believed in God. I had committed my life into his hands. And I said, well, he should guide me so he can let me know. So I decided I set aside a certain day, and I wanted to pray on that day. And at that time, I lived in the dorm uh, at our school. And you know how it is in the dorm. You hear the music from the neighboring room. Every once in a while, somebody pops in there, and you just don't have the quiet time to really sit down and pray. So at that time, I was engaged also in doing some outreach program in downtown in the city. And we had a place where we would meet on the weekends and discuss things with other people about God and the Bible. And I had a key to that place. And I knew that during the week, nobody was there and it was just empty and quiet. And so I did something that was quite daring. I decided I'll go to that place downtown in the city, and I'll lock myself in, and I will not go out until I have an answer from God as to which of the two options I should pursue. And the two options, you might be curious.
I am.
The two options were to be a teacher or to be a pastor. And I just could not decide between the two of them. So I
Teaching of what? Anything in particular?
Well, at that time,
We didn't get that far. We just got teaching and pastoring.
You're in
Okay.
early stages,
Okay.
so you're kind of open to where God is leading, but that was the general direction,
Okay.
at least. And so I went to the place, and I still remember, I said, okay, God, I will pray for one thing, because otherwise I do not know how to interpret your answer for this or that. So let's pray for one thing. And I said, okay, God, do you want me to be a pastor? Yes or no? Simple as that, And I prayed. No answer. So I told him again. I said, should I become a pastor? Yes or no? No answer. I asked him a third time. No answer. You try to think about something. You try to think about a Bible passage. You try to think about this or that. It was like a black hole, like nothing in my mind. It was just completely empty. So I said, okay, well, maybe you don't want me to be a pastor. Let's pray for being a teacher. So should I become a teacher? Yes or no? No answer. Second time, please help me to find out what you want me to do. Should I become a teacher? Yes or no? No answer. Third time, no answer. Now that really threw me off. It actually made me quite upset, because I thought, God, what is this now? Here I am. I want to do your will. I want to follow what you have in your plans for my life. I ask you, and you're just simply quiet. You don't answer my prayers. And it made me so upset that I could not really continue to pray in that mood. And so I had to calm down a little bit. Once in a while I'm upset as well. And so I grabbed the Bible. I read in the Bible. Nothing spectacular, nothing important, but it helped me to calm down a little bit. And then I said to myself, okay, God, you didn't give me an answer for the end goal, a pastor or a teacher, but you can at least tell me the next steps to go. Sometimes we want to know, God, 25 years from now, where am I? Will I be in this place
That's
or
me.
that place?
Fully guilty right here.
And we want to know exactly where our position is, and then we want to pursue that in the easiest way, But that's not how it works in life, at least not for me. And I think that's not how God really guides us and leads us. He rarely tells us 25, 30 years from now, you will be in Germany, you will be in the United States, you will be at that place, and you will have that position. No, it's more like in the Bible you have this word in Psalm 119, where God says, "Your word is a lamp unto my feet and a light." And a lamp at that time was not a flashlight that would beam, 20 miles into the future. It was a little oil lamp that would shed enough light for you to walk the next steps into the darkness. And once you took the faith and took those steps, you would have enough light to follow for the next couple steps. And that's how God leads. And so I said, well, you didn't show me the end goal. Show me at least the next steps. And the next steps for me at that time were either to stay at the place where I was or to go to another country, to England, and study there. And at that time, it was just absolutely clear to me that I did not want to stay at that place much longer, because it had created a real crisis in my faith through the teachers that I had, and the questions that they raised, and the answers that they didn't give, and living in the dormitory situation for 3 years with a particular dormitory dean. Just made me feel that this is not the location where I want to spend another year. And so I was honest with God and told him, this is my preference. This is really what I would like to see and do, but I want to be open to your leading. And when I said that prayer to God, at that moment, a Bible passage came to my mind. Before you try to think anything,
And nothing's
it's
coming.
just nothing. It's blank. And as soon as I was willing to be open to listen to him on that particular question, a Bible passage came to my mind. And the Bible passage was, this is my translation from the German. I read it in German, stay in the country and do good. And I was not even sure whether that is a Bible passage. So I looked up a concordance. We had a concordance there. And sure enough, it was Psalm 37. And when I read the whole psalm, it was such an encouragement to me that told me that if I would stay and continue to stay at that place, I would not go shipwreck with my faith. And God would take care for me and would lead me and guide me, even in that context that was not ideal in my eyes. And I could accept that.
That's kind of amazing, because you're talking about an Adventist school now.
Yes.
Many of us have gone through Adventist education. Some of us have had really amazing experiences.
Yes.
And some of us have also had less than amazing experiences. But God is asking you to stay.
Yes. See, that's the amazing thing. Sometimes you think this is not the ideal place. You think there's something better from my limited perspective. And that's understandable. But he has a broader perspective. He sees more than I do. And he has 1,000 ways to provide for you that you have not, and I have not even thought about, not even dreamed. And so to trust God that he is capable of leading you, no matter where you are, is really something amazing that I experienced in my life. Now here's let me just finish that little story, because that's the second part of what I began to share. So I started at that place. I continued my studies there. And a year later, I had an opportunity to apply for studying abroad, studying in England. Now, for that, I needed to, at that time, I received government subsidies, a stipend from the government for my studies. And if you wanted to study abroad in another country, you needed to apply in a special place in order to get government support for that study in another country as well. So I applied for that. And everyone Alicia, everyone I talked to, the secretary, the principal, the students, they all said, you don't even have to try. Nobody ever, never, ever has received any support from the government to study abroad for that particular program.
Now, were you trying to study at an Adventist school abroad or just a...
Yes, that was an Adventist. I wanted to go to Newbold College
Okay.
at that time, and I talked to a person, and he said, I've talked to the highest authorities. I have a folder that big with my correspondence, and they all turned it down. And that was the same story from everyone I talked to. And I said, well, if you don't try,
You'll never get it.
you never know. So I applied, and then I waited. And sometimes you have to wait, and waiting is the most difficult part, because you're like on hot coals. You want to move, you want to decide things, and you just have to learn to wait. And so I waited. No response from the official government place there. I waited and waited, and then the school year slowly came to a close. So I had to make a decision. So after a while, I just took the phone and called them. At that time, there were no cell phones. There's no iPhone. This was before iPhone time. We just had a landline in the dormitory. One phone for the entire dormitory. Think about that. So I called the place, and still remember the lady there. She said, okay, yeah, let me look up your file. And she said, oh, yeah. We looked at your file, and I made a recommendation. And but the final decision cannot be made until a special committee has met. The committee consists of professors and student representatives and different people. And they meet, and once they meet and come to a decision, that decision is final. And I said, well, could you at least tell me what your recommendation was? And she said, sure can. She said, I recommended not to grant that permission. And they've always followed my recommendation. But as I said, she said, it's not final until they meet and until they have met and come to a decision. Call me back next week, and then they will have reached a conclusion. So I called back next week, and she
I'm
says,
proud of you. I actually would have just given up because
no,
I would have been pretty certain, like, never mind.
That was quite disappointing. Yes, discouraging. So I knew she had recommended not to approve it. And she told me that they always had followed her recommendation. So my chances were rather slim. So next week I'll call, and she says, I'm very sorry, but somebody got sick in the committee and they couldn't meet. And so call me next week again, So I wait another week, Now this is easily said, but if you have to wait 2 weeks in a row for an answer that is important to you, that's a long time.
Yes.
So I call the next week. And by now she knows me, over the phone. And she says, I'm really sorry to tell you, but somehow they couldn't meet, and they were one member was not there, and they couldn't come to a conclusion. And she said, I'm really sorry to tell you, but so how soon do you need a decision? And I said, well, actually yesterday, because because the school year is ending here, and I need to know where. Well, she said, if that is the case, then the only thing we can do is that I will call each member of that committee myself and see what they say. And call me again at noon, she said, and I hope to give you an answer then. At 11 o'clock in the morning, the phone rang. The only phone rang in the dorm, and she calls. And the dean, ran to my room and called, there's somebody important on the phone for you. So I ran to the phone, and it's the lady, and the lady says, I have some good news for you. They all approved. Your application is granted. And I could not believe. I could not believe what I just heard. So I said to her, are you telling me that my application was granted and that I will receive that government grant to go to England? And she says, I'm sitting at my typewriter, and I'm typing the letter. It will go out in the mail tomorrow. Yes. I still have that letter framed in my office at home. I think I was the only one who ever received a government grant for that program to go to England and study. I think nobody after me ever received the same thing. And God just opened a door and made something possible that, humanly speaking, was just out of the picture.
That's an incredible story. I actually want to see this
I'll show it
frame
to
thing
you.
sometimes.
Yes,
You
I'll
have to
show
bring it
to
to
you.
me. So you go to Newbold,
I went to Newbold, yes.
right? So did you finish all of your college education at Newbold, or were you there just for 1 year?
No. See, the story sounds so fantastic, so smooth, so easy, but that's not how life goes. So
It didn't really sound that easy, Frank.
No. So I arrived at Newbold, and I was quite proud, actually, because I had English from grade 8 onwards until grade 13. I continued to read English, and I felt I'm fairly good in English. And I had applied for studying theology there. And I arrived at Newbold College, and because English is not my mother tongue, everyone has to take a placement test, English placement test. So I write my English placement test, and the next day I get the result. And the result was so devastating. My English was so miserable, so poor, so bad, that out of 15 credit hours, the regular credit hours that I was able to take, I had to take 12 credit hours, just English.
Oh, wow.
And I had come there not to learn English. I had come there to study theology. That's on a different level, I thought. So here I was, and I still remember at that time, I was not married, but I was good friends with my wife later, and we would write letters, handwritten letters, because this was beyond computer age. This was beyond email. This was beyond texting and cell phones. The only phones there were at that time were, where you had to throw in coins.
I do remember the
Remember that?
coin-operated
All
phones.
right, all
Yes.
right.
We had them in my dorm.
We're talking that age, And I still remember writing her a letter, and you can tell from my handwriting the day when I arrived very confidently, and the day after I received my devastating results of my English placement test. My handwriting, you could tell from my handwriting how devastated I was, how psychologically completely, all my hopes were gone. So I sit there in the English class, and right next to me is another German, a student who is supposed to learn English. And we both wanted to study theology, and we were not really interested in English, So we were talking to each other in German, not knowing that the teacher knew German full well.
Oh, no.
And understood every single word. And after a couple of days, she talked to me privately, and she said, "Frank, your attitude has to change. If you want to get anything, any blessing out of your time here, you have to focus on your English. You have to study hard, and you have to improve your English. And once your English is better, the second semester, you can take less English and more theology." And so I applied, and made sense to me. And then I agreed, grudgingly. I agreed, and I talked to the principal, and I got special permission. instead of 15 credit hours, I was granted permission 22 credit hours.
Oh, that's a lot of credit hours, Frank.
And that's a lot. I've never in my life studied so hard and so intense.
When did you have time to study?
I studied until Friday afternoon, and then Sabbath after sundown in the evening, I started to study again. And you read the theology. I still remember reading church history books, and there were words I never heard. So what are they talking about? And you had to look up in a dictionary, in a book. There was no digital dictionary or anything. You couldn't scan things. You would have to have the hard copy, look up the word, write it down, learn it. It was tough, and so I learned. And for me at that time, this was like a detour that was not necessary, that was prolonging and actually taking me longer than anything that I planned. But then I stayed, and I was able to reduce because I improved in my English. I got better. I stayed for the summer course. I took my Cambridge proficiency, and I passed. And I think it helped me to later be able to write my dissertation in English. If I had not had that experience at Newbold College, I doubt that my English would have been so good to help me doing my postgraduate studies at Andrews.
Wow.
So what looks like a detour in the moment, in the heat of it, really is a blessing in disguise. That's how it is sometimes.
So you only stayed there, though, for
a year.
like 1 year. And then did you go back?
And then I actually wanted to stay and graduate there with a BA after 3 years. That would have been the most pleasant, easiest way. But at that time, the brethren in Germany didn't see light into that option. And they said, well, you have to come back. If you want to work in Germany, you have to graduate in Germany. And so obeyingly,
so you wanted to be a pastor in
I
Germany.
wanted to
This is
a
what
pastor
the goal was.
then, yes.
So you get through the school in Germany, and then you become a pastor?
Yes.
Yes? Okay.
So I worked as a pastor for 3 years, and then I applied for a stipend and was granted that, and could go to Andrews and do some graduate studies there.
Okay, so you mentioned that you had been writing letters just to a special someone. Did you get married during any of this time, or where does she fall into the story?
Oh well, no, not at that time. We were
Not that time,
we were
okay.
dating. We were writing letters, but actually we dated for quite a while. I think we dated for 7 years.
Oh, that is quite a while.
Yes.
Wow, that's
a long time. I do not recommend it, but
I dated for 1 year,
yeah.
but that's okay.
But dating, if you see the person on a daily basis and dating while you're abroad and have no time to see each other is a completely different experience. But writing letters, I tell you, is a wonderful tool to get to know a person really well.
So my husband and I, our entire dating and our engagement was long distance. So I mean, it wasn't huge. It was 5.5 hours, but it wasn't close enough that you just pop over, So ours was phone calls. So we would talk every single night, which I don't even want to know how much his phone bill was because he would call me. So that shows you he was in it for, because he was willing to pay the phone bill. But all right, so you go over to Andrews and you work on your dissertation or your doctorate, or what are you working on when you come over to Andrews?
Yes, I had worked as a pastor in Germany, and I had also, well, let me share another little detail of the story, because when I had finished my theology studies in Germany, I felt not really prepared for the ministry, because we never had a class in evangelism, and and never really had a class on how to give Bible studies, etc. And at that time, I have heard wonderful reports about a very talented young teacher who trained pastors and theology students in Chicago at the Evangelistic Institute there at NADI. And his name was Mark Finley. And so I said to myself, I have to see him. I have to be with him. I have to learn how he's doing things. So I saved all I could, working hard all summer long in the hospital, earning money and saving it. Went to Andrews in order to study with Mark Finley in Chicago at the Evangelistic Institute in August. I arrived in June, and I took a few classes in the seminary, and I was just so excited. I've never heard what I heard the professor said there. I've never heard anything like that in Germany. So it was just like a new world that was opening up to myself. And in July, the General Conference session met in Indianapolis, and in that July, Mark Finley accepted a call to go to the Trans-European Division to London
Oh, no.
and be there for the next 5 years. And I sat there and I said to myself, here I have come all the way to study with him in August, and in July he decides to leave. Is that fair? Now that's not how it's supposed to be. And I was really disappointed because I was looking forward to being with him and learning from him. And so I texted back, and not texted, I called back, I wrote back to my conference president and said, should I continue to stay here until December? Because I was accepted as an intern already in Germany. And he said, no, you have to come back right away. And he says, but Mark Finley had agreed to have an evangelistic institute in Munich for 3 months, and he will keep his commitment. And since your district is just the neighboring district, I will allow you to participate at that evangelistic institute in Munich with Mark Finley. And so it was even better. So I had it in the German context, and I could study with Mark Finley for 3 months. And that led me to be one of the very few, if not the only, intern at that time in Germany who started to do evangelism.
Oh,
Because
wow.
what I learned, I wanted to practice, not because I saw myself as the evangelist necessarily, but because I said, well, I'll give it a try. We'll see how it works. And people noticed, and they said, well, if that is the case, they had a strategic plan at that time to replace 5 teachers at our school who were close to retirement age. So in Old Testament and practical theology, New Testament, systematic. And they said, we want you to be in practical theology and evangelism because you're engaged in evangelism. And you should guide that. And
So,
that was not really what I saw myself. People thought, your father is an evangelist, so the son has to be an evangelist, and that's not how it works. And so I was debating, should I accept that invitation or not? And I was counseled better accept that. You will never ever get an opportunity like that you will get a stipend to come to Andrews to study there. So I went. I first did my master's, and during the 1 year that I worked on my master's, the key professor for that practical program died of cancer very suddenly. And because they couldn't replace him immediately, they had to stop new applicants for the program. And so here I was stuck again. And so I negotiated with the brethren, and said, all right, let's switch my major and my minor. My minor was systematic theology. My major was practical theology. Let's switch that and have a major in systematics. and a minor in practical theology, and they agreed on that. And that's why I ended up in systematic theology, which is really what I like and what I wanted to do. But see, that's again something that sometimes not God, but sometimes life does not turn out exactly the same way that you anticipate and plan. So they had planned to use me as a teacher in Germany on my return. But while I was at Andrews, believe it or not, East Germany and West Germany united. A miracle. Nobody had that on the radar. That communist, socialist East Germany that was separated by a wall would reunite peacefully with West Germany. And through that political change, also the situation at the school changed, and they moved the seminary from Darmstadt, where I was supposed to be, to the eastern part of Friedensau. And they had another teacher take the one place for systematic theology. So when I was finished, there was no place for me anymore at the school. And so you were faced again with a question, what shall I do now? And I said, I'll go back into the ministry. And that's what I did. And many people could not understand that. They said, well, you're overqualified. You have a PhD now and you're going back into the ministry. Why is that? And I said, well, I like the work in the ministry, and I do not want to miss out on that. So I went back into the ministry and worked as a pastor for another 4 years. And then I received a call to be a Bible teacher at Bogenhofen. And that's what I did for 18 years before I came to the United States and work now at the General Conference.
Well, that was like a quick.
Quick.
All right. So, wow, I just had to I'm trying to regroup with all that information. So you went to become a teacher at Bogenhofen.
Mm-hmm.
Now Bogenhofen is a university?
It's a
Or is
senior
this-
college. It's
Okay.
a small, tiny school in Austria. Yes.
Okay, so you're teaching
And-
theology
and,
majors or
And I'm a theology teacher there and teach theology. I also teach religion in the academy. I teach religion for the German language department. They have a wonderful German language department where you can learn German as a foreign language. And I had to teach the religion classes there as well.
Okay.
So you in a small school, you have to teach many different
and you were
things.
there for, did you say 18 years?
18 years.
That's
yes.
a lot of years.
A lot of years.
Did you enjoy being a teacher?
Very much so.
So interestingly, the two things you're praying over,
Exactly.
being a pastor,
Yes.
which is more like the religion theology kind of thing, and being a teacher, God kind of just merged all of those for
Yes,
you.
and actually it's both of them. I had the blessing of both of them. And in the pastoral ministry, I like the teaching aspect the best, giving Bible studies and studying the Word of God. I like that. And in being a teacher, I like the pastoral part. You have to relate to the students, and you cannot just pass on intellectual knowledge. You have to deal with them on a personal level as well. So the both really merged together. And by the way, in the Bible, in Ephesians, Paul mentions different gifts for the church, apostles and evangelists, and he says pastors and teachers. And the way it is worded there in the New Testament is that the pastor and the teacher is the same group of people. So really, if you want to be a pastor, you always are a teacher. And if you want to be a teacher, really, you have to have a pastoral heart. You have to be a pastor. So the two belong together. And maybe that's the reason why God didn't tell me this way or that way. I don't know.
So you spent 18 years
18 years, yes.
teaching at Bogenhofen.
Mm-hmm.
All right. So at some point, though, you do get married. I think it was before Bogenhofen. Is it Bogenhofen?
Bogenhofen. Uh-huh.
Bogenhofen. I'm going to have to learn how to
Mm-hmm.
say it properly
Yes.
here. And you have children.
Yes.
Life doesn't always go as
Smoothly,
planned,
yes.
as your whole life story has shown us. Tell us a little bit about your wife and your family.
Yes, I got married to my wife. She has a typical German name. Her name is Ulrike. It's not so easy to pronounce for English-speaking people.
I won't try them.
And we got married in 1988, and then went to the United States. It's basically our honeymoon time together. And then we returned back to Germany to worked as a pastor. She was a trained elementary teacher. We had 3 sons who are all grown now, and then we went to Bogenhofen, and we enjoyed our time there. She had an opportunity to teach at a church school as a teacher, and also in a public setting, public school setting. And then, of course, as you said, life is not always as you expect it sometimes, or as you desire it to be. But she was diagnosed with cancer, breast cancer, and she did not survive that. And just about a year after she was diagnosed with cancer, she died. And that, of course, is a tough experience. And to go through a significant loss like that shakes you on all kinds of different levels, spiritually, emotionally, and your whole existence is a different one afterwards in many, many ways. And so that is an experience that I don't wish anyone to experience, really. It's a very painful experience, and yet at the same time, God has been very gracious, and I had the privilege of experiencing real helpful help from many people, and experience the blessings and the beauty of the church. You know, when you work as a pastor and you work in leadership positions, you get to know some things about church members and the church that are not always so nice. But to see that, made me really realize the blessings of having a faith community that cares and that is there for you and that supports you and gives you a network that helps you to survive in a traumatic situation like that.
How old were your boys?
My boys were quite not young. The youngest was 11, 16, and 19. Yeah.
How do you I can't imagine going through what you went through. I don't actually want to
Sure.
imagine it. But do you feel like that you struggled with your faith? Like, do you feel like you leaned in more deeply? Do you feel like it made you question God? And how did that experience shape who you are fundamentally and how you view God now?
Yeah, good question. You know, that is a question that cannot be answered easily and shortly, for that matter. I have dealt with some of these questions in a new book that I'm just finished writing. It's called Love Is: A Journey of Grief, Grace, and Gratitude. And when you experience something like that, there are all kinds of questions that swirl through your mind about God and His justice and love, and about life and who you are and your identity, and all kinds of things that are connected with that. And of course, experiencing significant loss in life, like the death of your spouse, is something that has the potential and the capability of of shaking your faith to an extent that you can go shipwreck easily. So the good thing is that I was not alone in this. I had a very supportive family and friends, and as I said, they gave me helpful help. You know, there's help and there's helpful help, and it's not the same. And also, you know, when you experience something like that, you have all kinds of questions, especially these nagging why questions. Why did this happen? Why to her? Why now? Why not others, etc. And we were fortunate enough to raise our own why questions. And we would say, why should that not happen to us? Why not? Just because we're Christian? Are we exempt from suffering and pain? No, we live in a world that is imperfect, that is sinful, that is marred by many things. And in a sinful and imperfect world, why should we not get sick? Of course, if you have a healthy lifestyle, you can avoid many things. But still, you breathe the air that is polluted. You drink the water that is polluted. You drink the you eat things, you know, that are part of an ecosystem that is not clean and perfect and unaffected by the impact of human beings on the environment, etc. And so, why should we be exempt from that? And I think the challenge really is not that we believe, if you believe in God, then everything will be good and you will never suffer this or that. But the most important thing is not what happens to you. Sometimes you don't even have control over what happens to you, and it's beyond your control. When you're responsible, then of course you have to change things. But some things are beyond your control. The most important thing is not what happens to you, is how you react to what happens to you, and how you deal with these things. And that, I think, is a challenge that helped me grow in many ways, and still deal with the pain of losing the love of my wife, and to lose her as a person, and to have to live without her. And that is a process that is ongoing. That is never finished. I used to think that you have to go through different stages of grief, and there are famous 5 stages of grief, and then you pass through them and finally you accept it, and then you're over it. No, you're never over it, for a very simple reason, because you have to understand what grief really is. And grief is really just an expression of your love for the person that you have lost. You would not grieve if you had not loved the person in the first place. So if somebody dies out there, you don't grieve because you haven't had a chance to love the person. But the stronger your love for the person, the stronger your emotions for the person, the stronger the grief that you experience for the person. And so grief really is an expression of our love for the person who is no longer with us. And therefore, just as love will not go away, and you will never come to a point where you say, well, can't you get over your love? You wouldn't say that, because the person is too precious and you've experienced too many things with a person. And so grief really is nothing that you leave behind, but that you have to learn to live with and to integrate that into your life. And as multifaceted and different, and has different facets, your love has different facets. Grief is just the same. It's you love the person not just physically, you love the person because you like the smile, you like the smell, you like the humor that the person has, you like the books she liked to read, the music she liked to hear, and all that is part of your love relationship in all its different ways. And that's how grief also works when you love the person who is no longer there, because you're reminded by reading something, you're reminded by listening to something, you're reminded by the smell, you're reminded by this and that, and it's just part of the love relationship that you enjoyed with that person. And to learn to deal with that and to integrate that into your life, I think is the first step to have a healthy relationship with that person who is no longer there, and value the person and appreciate the person, and honor the person really who has died.
I love that, because it really is a those 5 stages of grief. It's like it just doesn't just go away.
No.
And a new anniversary, or seeing a book or hearing a song can take you back to
Oh,
a
yes.
moment, and it's not like all of a sudden you're just easily at peace with something. It's
No.
but you're right. We mourn those that we've
Yes.
loved, and the deeper we mourn, often is the deeper we have loved. I know that at some point you are obviously called to the general conference because you're here. Was it hard to leave that community? Because it sounds like, you created this community that really surrounded you.
It definitely was. Some people think, oh, you've been called to the general conference. That's kind of the highest calling there is, and it's a step advanced, on your career. That's not how I looked at it. I had a very safe environment there that helped me to continue to work, which is not easy. You have to continue working full time, and yet you're responsible alone now for at least the 2 children who are still at home, and you have to manage with your own feelings and the grief and the pain, and that at the beginning is it's just chaos. And you have to wade your way through all these difficulties and challenges and find your ways. And I had family there, my sisters, my parents-in-law, who were very helpful, and church members who really helped me in significant ways to handle the daily challenges that I didn't have here. So I come here and I don't have a circle of friends. Here, I don't know anyone in church. Here, I didn't have family around. Here, I was basically alone. And that, makes you realize in more than one ways that you're really dependent on God's grace and His sustaining power. Who else is there to care for you? To whom do I turn if I get seriously sick? My doctor in Austria, he said, what do you do if you have a problem with your kidneys and you have kidney stones? You cannot drive yourself to the hospital with that pain, he says. You need to have somebody to take care of you. But here I am, who cares for me? And I don't have a network of a support system as I used to have in Austria, for instance, at the school. So it made me realize that I have to do what I can do in order to be as healthy as possible. But there's something beyond, where you just have to trust and learn to trust God and His goodness and His grace to sustain you and to keep you and to lead you.
Do you feel like the longer that you've been here, you've made a little bit better of a circle?
Of course.
I'm hoping. Just so you know, Frank, if you ever have a kidney stone, you can call me and my husband.
Oh,
my
yeah,
husband
yeah,
has
yeah.
had kidney stones. He will be there in a moment.
He knows the pain.
He does know the pain. He keeps telling me it's worse than childbirth. I'm like, you've never had childbirth.
Yes, yes.
But that's okay. We can
Mhm.
argue about that one later. But it's I'm glad that you were able to come here.
Yes,
And
yes, I'm
we're
glad too.
glad that the BRI brought you over here. And thank you for sharing your story with us. And just so you know, you are
Well, it's
part
just
of
a
my
tiny
network
little
here. It
part
is.
of my story. You know,
It's so
the story
hard,
is so
like
much
to
bigger
put
than
it
that.
in there in such a short period of time. I feel like most people I interview, I could do 4 or 5 episodes with them, but we, alas, don't have the time.
Mhm.
But thank you so much for hearing
Oh, my
God's
pleasure.
call and for coming to join us here at A&N Profile. We hope that you enjoyed this episode of A&M Profiles with our guest, Frank Hasel. If you haven't already, please take a moment to subscribe to our podcast or YouTube channel, wherever it is that you're tuning in today, because we don't want you to miss any future episodes. Thank you for spending this time with us, and join us next week as I continue to get to know the life stories of more inspiring people. Thank you.